The grand hall of Ravenswood Castle, illuminated by towering chandeliers, pulsed with the anticipation of a magnificent event. Nobles from across the kingdom had gathered to witness the most awaited wedding of the season, the union of the Duke of Blackwood, Sebastian Graham, and Lady Claribel, one of the most sought-after young women in London. Yet no one, except the Duke himself, knew that among the guests was a woman harboring a secret capable of shattering the perfect facade of the occasion. Isabel Harper, dressed in a simple yet elegant silk gown, stood near the entrance of the hall, drawing glances that ranged from curiosity to disdain. She no longer belonged to that world, at least not anymore. 3 years prior, she had been courted by the Duke himself, only to be abandoned without explanation when he assumed the role of heir and committed to marrying a woman of equivalent standing. However, the most unsettling aspect of her unexpected return to society was not her presence but the small hand she held tightly. The boy, with sparkling green eyes and slightly wavy brown hair, seemed enchanted by the grandeur of the place. He pointed at the statues and murmured curious observations, oblivious to the silent turmoil his presence was causing. For Isabel, braving that hostile environment was an act of both courage and desperation. She knew her son, Lucian, was the spitting image of the man now about to be married, and she also knew it would take just one glance for Sebastian to realize the truth. Across the hall, the Duke of Blackwood observed the activity with his signature air of confidence. He was the embodiment of nobility, tall, lean, with perfectly styled brown hair and a cold gaze that seemed to disarm any opponent. For Sebastian, the wedding was nothing more than a necessary social transaction. Lady Claribel was beautiful, yes, but the marriage promised political benefits he could not ignore. Yet something about that night felt disquieting, a sense that his prized control was about to slip through his fingers. When the Duke's eyes met Isabel's, the impact was immediate. He froze, his polished smile vanishing from his face. Isabel held his gaze, her lips curling into a smile that did not reach her eyes. Beside her, little Lucien stared at the Duke with the curiosity of a child who did not yet grasp the weight of such a charged encounter. "Who is that woman?" Lady Claribel whispered at his side, unaware of the rising tension on Sebastian's face. He, however, did not answer. The sight of Isabel and the boy, a miniature copy of himself, left him speechless. Isabel took a step forward, seizing the moment of distraction to approach the Duke. The hall remained filled with murmurs and laughter, but to Sebastian, all sound seemed to vanish. When she stopped just a few feet from him, Lucian, growing impatient, tugged at her skirt. "Mama, is that the man from the portrait in our sitting room?" The child's innocent whisper was enough to destroy any doubt Sebastian might have had. He stared at Isabel, his expression a mix of shock, disbelief, and something deeper: regret. "Why are you here?" he murmured, his voice low and strained. "Because it's time for you to know the truth, Sebastian," Isabel replied, her tone calm despite the storm raging within her. "And perhaps the kingdom deserves to know who you really are." As the Duke struggled to regain control of his expression, Lady Claribel approached again, sensing that something was amiss. "Sebastian, is everything all right?" she asked, her smile gentle. But he didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Isabel as the weight of 3 years of wrong choices finally came crashing down on him. The silence surrounding the Duke of Blackwood was deafening, even in the middle of the ballroom where laughter and music tried to mask the growing murmurs. Isabel Harper stood there, defiant in a way he had never seen before, and beside her, a boy who could have been his reflection in a mirror 3 decades ago. Every detail, the emerald green eyes, the slightly unruly brown hair, was a cruel reminder of something he could never erase: the past. Lady Claribel frowned, uneasy with her fiancé's behavior. "Sebastian, who is this woman?" she insisted, her tone sweet but undercut with imperiousness. Her hand rested delicately on his arm, trying to draw his attention, but Sebastian's gaze remained locked on Isabel. An old acquaintance, he replied, his voice heavy with tension. It was a pitiful lie, and he knew it. Isabel, of course, knew it too, and the slight arch of her brow made it clear she had no intention of letting him escape so easily. An acquaintance who might have more to say about you than you'd like, Isabel retorted, her faint smile failing to reach her eyes. She bent down to speak to the boy at her side. Lucien, why don't you go with Miss Rose to grab a slice of cake? I'm sure you'll enjoy the treats here. Lucien hesitated for a moment, but when Rose, the young governess accompanying them, beckoned to him, he nodded eagerly. Can I have the chocolate one, Mama? Of course, darling. She leaned down to kiss his forehead before straightening up, her gaze returning to Sebastian. Now, where were we? Sebastian felt as though the ground might swallow him whole. He was not a man accustomed to losing his composure, but here was Isabel, ready to dismantle everything he had built. Clearing his throat, he tried to regain control. I think we need to talk. In private. Entirely agreed, Isabel said, her tone as sweet as it was sharp. Before Lady Clarabelle could protest, Sebastian was already firmly leading Isabel out of the ballroom, passing the curious and shocked gazes of the guests. In the empty corridor, the words came in a torrent. What are you trying to do, Isabel? Why did you come here with him? She crossed her arms, staring at him with a calmness only desperation could bring. You think you're so powerful, don't you, Sebastian? That you can walk away from someone and pretend they never existed. But that's not how life works. I didn't know, he whispered, his voice heavy with guilt and disbelief. You never told me. I tried, Sebastian. Isabel shot back, her voice rising slightly before she controlled it again. I tried every way I could, but you had already decided to move on with your perfect life, hadn't you? Your ambition was always more important. Sebastian ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. He couldn't refute what she said. She was right. When he left for London, determined to become the model heir his family demanded, he had left Isabel behind without a second glance. And now? He asked, finally meeting her gaze. What do you want from me? I didn't come here for revenge, if that's what you're thinking, Isabel said, her tone softening. I came because Lucien deserves to know his father, and because you need to face the consequences of your choices, Sebastian. He stood silent, absorbing her words. The weight of his actions, or rather his inaction, hung over him like an impending storm. But before he could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. Lady Clarabelle appeared, her face a mix of anger and concern. Sebastian, what is going on? Why are you speaking to this woman? The Duke looked from Isabel to Lady Clarabelle. It was a moment of decision, a moment that would define not just his future, but also the future of the child waiting on the other side of the door. Clarabelle, he began, but his voice faltered. He knew there were no words that could smooth over what was about to unfold. The once grand and tranquil corridor now felt oppressively small, unable to contain the tension between the three figures. Lady Clarabelle, her face flushed with indignation, waited for an explanation that refused to come. Isabel, standing beside her, wore a calm expression, though her eyes betrayed the resolve of someone who had no intention of backing down. And Sebastian? The Duke of Blackwood, always in control, now felt like a shipwrecked man adrift at sea. Clarabelle, he began again, his voice trembling with a rare vulnerability. There's something you need to know. Oh, I imagine there is, she snapped, crossing her arms. And I would love to hear it, Sebastian. Perhaps you can start by explaining why you left the ballroom in the middle of our reception to have a private meeting with a peasant? Isabel let out a soft, bitter laugh, as sharp as broken glass. A peasant? I wasn't aware that was my title now. Fascinating. She stepped forward, brushing off the insult. Lady Clarabelle, if I may, let me simplify things. I'm here because the Duke is the father of my child." The words landed like thunder, reverberating down the corridor. Clarabelle's mouth fell open, her voice caught somewhere between disbelief and outrage, as her gaze darted between Sebastian and Isabel. Sebastian ran a hand through his hair, an increasingly common gesture, and looked down, as if the floor might offer him some escape. "This is a joke, isn't it?" Clarabelle finally found her voice. "Sebastian, tell me this is some ridiculous misunderstanding. This woman is clearly here to blackmail you." "It's not blackmail," Isabel cut in before he could respond. "I want nothing from the Duke except for him to acknowledge the existence of the son he abandoned." "I didn't know," Sebastian murmured again, almost like a mantra. He looked at Clarabelle, then back at Isabel. "I swear I didn't know." "How convenient," Isabel replied, her tone as cold as steel. "You knew enough to leave me when I needed you most. That should have been a clue, shouldn't it?" Clarabelle staggered back a step as though she had been struck. "Sebastian, you knew this woman before we met?" He closed his eyes for a moment, as though trying to shut out the shame. "Yes, we knew each other years ago, before anything between us, Clarabelle." "And you never thought it relevant to mention this?" Her voice rose, cutting through the oppressive silence of the corridor. "Good God, Sebastian, this isn't some minor secret. This is a scandal. Do you have any idea what this could mean for us? For our reputation?" Sebastian took a step toward her, but she pulled away. "Clarabelle, please, let me explain. I never knew about the boy. I would have done things differently if I had known." "And now?" Clarabelle demanded, her voice lower but no less cutting. "Do you intend to throw everything away for this woman and her child?" Isabel watched the confrontation unfold with a mixture of pain and satisfaction. This wasn't exactly what she wanted, but perhaps it was what Sebastian needed to finally face the truth. Sebastian turned his gaze to Isabel, and for the first time, she saw something in his expression she had never seen before. Genuine vulnerability. He took a deep breath before answering. "Clarabelle, I need to make this right. For the boy, and for her." Clarabelle stepped back, her expression betraying a mix of fury and humiliation. "This is unacceptable," she hissed. "You haven't just ruined our celebration, you've destroyed our future. I never should have trusted you." Without waiting for a reply, she spun on her heel and stormed down the corridor, leaving Sebastian and Isabel alone. The silence that followed was so thick it seemed to choke the air itself. "You knew this would happen," Sebastian said at last, his voice low. "I knew the truth has a funny way of catching up with people," Isabel replied. "What you do with it is up to you." Sebastian met her gaze, his green eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I want to meet my son." Isabel didn't flinch, but neither did she smile. "Then prove you deserve to." Sebastian stood in the corridor for what felt like an eternity, the weight of all his wrong choices pressing down on him. Isabel's revelation had struck like lightning, shattering the carefully constructed facade of his perfect life. But it wasn't the scandal or the potential for public humiliation that shook him the most. It was the boy, his son, a part of him that he had never known existed. He turned to Isabel, who watched him with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and distrust. "Tell me, Isabel," he began, his voice softer than he intended. "Why did you come? Not just for him. There's more to it, isn't there?" Isabel let out a small sigh, as though he had finally touched on the heart of the matter. "Do you have any idea what it's like to raise a child on your own, Sebastian? To explain to him why other boys have fathers picking them up from school, while he doesn't? I came because Lucian deserves answers. And because deep down, I thought you might be man enough to face them." Her words hit Sebastian like a physical blow. He had always prided himself on his strength, on his ability to face any challenge. But nothing, not the fiercest political negotiations or disputes over land, had prepared him for Isabel's unflinching honesty. "And I want to give him those answers," he said with determination. "I want to be part of his life. I want to do what I should have done from the start." She arched an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "That's easy to say now, when the truth has been thrown in your face. But how can I trust you? How do I know this isn't just a momentary burst of guilt that will fade as soon as your curiosity does?" Before he could answer, light footsteps echoed in the corridor. Lucien appeared, holding the hand of the governess and balancing a plate of cake, his expression carefree and delighted, oblivious to the storm swirling around him. "Mama, did you try the cake? It's amazing!" he exclaimed, his eyes bright with excitement. He glanced at Sebastian with curiosity, as though trying to piece together who he was. "You're the owner of the castle, aren't you?" Sebastian knelt, lowering himself to the boy's eye level. For the first time, he noticed details only a father would recognize. The curve of Lucien's mouth, the inquisitive glint in his green eyes so much like his own had been as a child. "I am," he replied, his voice surprisingly steady. "But I think you like the cake more than the castle." Lucien laughed, shaking his head. "Cake is way better." Sebastian's heart tightened. That laugh, so simple and joyful, filled him with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He looked up at Isabel, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. "I want to know my son," he repeated, this time addressing Lucien directly. "If you'll let me." Isabel hesitated. There were countless reasons to say no, to keep Lucien away from the potential pain Sebastian could cause. But there was also something genuine in his eyes, something she had never seen before. "This won't be easy," she said finally. "Lucien already has a life. He doesn't need empty promises, Sebastian. If you're going to be in his life, you have to stay. No excuses, no disappearing." "I'll stay," he promised, "for as long as he needs me. And for you, Isabel. I won't fail this time." She studied him for a long moment, before giving a small nod. "Then we'll start slow. No grand gestures, just get to know him." Sebastian smiled at Lucien, still kneeling. "How about you show me where the rest of that amazing cake is?" The boy nodded enthusiastically, tugging at the Duke's arm, leading him down the corridor with the eagerness of a child ready for an adventure. Isabel watched them go, her expression a mix of hope and caution. It was a small step, but perhaps the beginning of something much bigger. The tea room of the castle, with its opulent tapestries and mahogany furniture, seemed an unlikely setting for the beginnings of a family bond. Yet, here they were, Sebastian, Isabel, and Lucien, seated around a table where only crumbs remained of the cake the boy had eagerly devoured. The Duke of Blackwood, usually so composed and aloof, observed his son intently, as though trying to absorb years of lost moments in just a few minutes. "Do you always live here?" Lucien asked, leaning back to stare at the enormous chandelier overhead. His eyes sparkled with the curiosity of a child enchanted by the splendor around him. "The castle is so big. Does it have ghosts?" Sebastian chuckled, a rare sound that, in this moment, felt unexpectedly natural. "Some say it does, but so far none of them have dared show themselves to me." Lucien laughed, delighted. "I think they're scared of you." "Possibly," the Duke replied with a smile before glancing sideways at Isabel. "I imagine you're not so easily intimidated as the ghosts are." Isabel arched a brow. "I've had plenty of practice facing scary things." There was an edge to her words, but a faint touch of humor softened the blow. Lucien interrupted before the conversation between the adults could turn more tense. "Mama says I can be anything I want when I grow up, even an explorer like the ones in the books we read." "An explorer?" Sebastian leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "And what would you like to explore, Lucien?" "Forests and mountains, and maybe the sea." The boy waved his arms in the air, mimicking a ship braving giant waves. "But Mama says I need to learn how to swim first." Sebastian laughed again, though this time there was more to his laughter, a quiet sense of pride. He saw in Lucien a reflection of his own restless spirit as a boy, the desire to venture beyond what was expected. Learning to swim is always a good idea. Perhaps we could do that together someday. Isabelle shot a cautious glance at Sebastian, but Lucien beamed with excitement. You know how to swim? Are you good at it? I'd like to think so, Sebastian replied, keeping his tone light. I grew up on an estate with a lake. I spent many summers diving into it. Then you can teach me. Lucien's enthusiasm was boundless. Isabelle, however, maintained a serious expression. Slow down, Lucien, she said gently but firmly. One thing at a time. Sebastian nodded, understanding the unspoken message. He knew Isabelle was testing his resolve, challenging him to prove he wasn't acting on impulse. It was fair given how deeply he'd let her down before. One thing at a time, the Duke repeated, his gaze meeting Isabelle's, carrying a promise that extended beyond swimming lessons. Later, after Lucien wandered off to explore the castle's corridors under the watchful eye of the governess, Isabelle and Sebastian were finally alone. She crossed her arms, her sharp gaze fixed on him. He likes you, but that doesn't mean I trust you, Sebastian. I didn't expect you to trust me this soon, he replied, his sincerity evident. But I'll prove that I'm worthy of your trust, both of yours. You'd better, Isabelle said, her tone firm. Because if you hurt him, even accidentally, you'll never see Lucien again. Sebastian didn't hesitate. I won't hurt my son, Isabelle. Not this time. You have my word. As much as she wanted to doubt him, something in his voice made her pause. Perhaps, just perhaps, the man she had once known was still there, buried beneath layers of pride and obligation. We'll see, she said finally, turning to call for Lucien. As the boy ran back into her arms, Sebastian watched them with a new feeling stirring within him. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he knew one thing. He was determined to be part of their lives, a part that Lucien could one day be proud to call his own. The night at Ravenswood Castle was tranquil, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the gardens below. The sky, studded with stars, seemed a perfect backdrop for reflection and unspoken promises. Sebastian stood on the terrace, his arms resting on the stone balustrade as he gazed out at the horizon. Each moment spent with Lucien and Isabelle brought him closer to something he had long avoided, emotional responsibility. You seem distant, even here at home. Isabelle's voice broke through his thoughts. She appeared on the terrace, the folds of her simple dress swaying lightly in the breeze. There was something about her, a quiet strength, that always seemed to disarm him. I was thinking, he began without turning to face her, about how I ended up here, about how much time I've wasted. It's too late for regrets, Isabelle replied, approaching cautiously. But not too late to try and fix what you've broken. He finally turned to face her. I didn't know, he said again, the words more of an admission than an excuse. But at the same time, I knew I was leaving you behind. I chose to ignore it, and that's almost as bad as knowing and not acting. Isabelle crossed her arms, meeting his gaze head-on. Lucien is a bright, loving child, but that didn't happen without effort. I fought Sebastian. For him, for myself. And now, you want to show up and be part of this? Yes, he replied without hesitation, surprising even himself. Because I see what I've lost, and I won't lose any more. She let out a sigh, running a hand through her unpretentiously tied brown hair. You talk like it's simple. But building a bond with a child isn't just about showing up with promises. It's about being there, Sebastian, on the good days and the bad. He stepped closer, his intense gaze unwavering. I'm learning that. Every moment I spend with him teaches me something new. I'm not pretending this will be easy. But I'm willing to try, Isabelle. Not just for him, but for you too. Her heart wavered. There was weight to Sebastian's words that she couldn't ignore, but the scars of the past still lingered. And when things get hard, when the novelty wears off, what will you do then? I'll stay, he promised, his voice as solid as stone. I'll stay because I can't imagine my life without him now, and because, despite everything, I still... He paused, then released the words. I still care about you. The breeze seemed to pause in its dance. Isabel looked away to the stars, trying to steady her thoughts. It was tempting to believe him, but she had been hurt before by trusting too easily. Lucien is what matters now, she said finally, sidestepping the vulnerability of the moment. If you want to be part of his life, you'll have to prove you're capable of more than just pretty words. Sebastian nodded, understanding that Isabel needed time. I will prove it, he said simply. Just then, the sound of quick footsteps echoed across the terrace, and Lucien appeared, his eyes alight with excitement. Mama, there's a huge owl in the garden. You have to see it. Sebastian laughed, relieved by the interruption. Let's see it together. Can you show me the way, Lucien? Of course. The boy grabbed his father's hand without hesitation, and Isabel watched, torn between hope and caution, as the two disappeared down the corridor. Under the starry sky, Isabel stood alone for a moment, allowing herself a rare flicker of vulnerability. Perhaps, she thought, there was a chance to rebuild something from what had been lost. But that would depend on Sebastian, and on her own heart. The gardens of Ravenswood Castle were bathed in moonlight, and the owl that had captured Lucien's attention soared to a distant branch, perching with majestic grace. Sebastian watched as the boy pointed and laughed, every movement brimming with youthful energy. To Lucien, the world seemed to be a constant series of discoveries, and Sebastian was only beginning to grasp the privilege of being a part of it. She's huge, isn't she, Papa? Lucien asked, spinning around to face him. The word Papa rolled off his tongue so naturally that Sebastian needed a moment to process it. Yes, she is, Sebastian replied, smiling at his son. And very clever, too. People say owls are messengers of good news. Lucien grinned, apparently satisfied with the explanation, before returning his focus to the bird. For Sebastian, it was a simple moment, but profoundly meaningful. He had been called father, and for the first time, he felt he was beginning to earn the title. From a distance, Isabel watched them, her silhouette outlined by the soft glow of the oil lamps illuminating the garden. It was hard to ignore how naturally Lucien had accepted Sebastian into his life. Yet, she couldn't shake the fear that everything could crumble. When Lucien dashed across the lawn in pursuit of a firefly, Sebastian approached Isabel. He's incredible, he said softly. Yes, he is, Isabel replied, her eyes never leaving the boy. And that's the result of a lot of hard work. Raising a child alone isn't easy, Sebastian. There were so many nights when I thought I was failing him. Sebastian nodded, a flicker of regret crossing his face. I should never have left you to do it alone, Isabel. It was cowardly. I see that now. Seeing it now doesn't change the past, she said, though her voice carried no bitterness. But maybe, just maybe, it can change the future. Before Sebastian could respond, Lucien came racing back, his cheeks flushed from running. Papa, do you think there are more owls here? Maybe a whole family? Sebastian knelt to meet the boy's gaze, a genuine smile lighting his face. Maybe. And if there are, I bet they'd love to meet you. Lucien gave a small leap of joy and grabbed Sebastian's hand, tugging him back toward the castle. Isabel followed them, something shifting within her, something that felt almost like trust beginning to take root. Later that night, with Lucien fast asleep in the guest room Sebastian had prepared for him, Isabel found the Duke in the library. He was seated by the fireplace, watching the flames dance. The golden light cast shadows across his face, highlighting a vulnerability she rarely saw. You're doing well with him, Isabel said, breaking the silence. Sebastian looked up at her, a faint melancholic smile on his lips. "I have so much to learn, but I want him to have what I never did." "And what's that?" Isabel asked, curious. "A real family," he answered without hesitation. "My childhood was full of rules, duties, and expectations. There was never any room for something as simple as love." His words struck a chord within Isabel. She moved closer, taking a seat in the armchair beside him. "Lucien doesn't need perfection, Sebastian. He just needs to know you'll be there even when things get hard." "I will be," he said, his voice steady with conviction, "no matter what." In that moment, Isabel felt a flicker of hope that perhaps Sebastian was truly changing, but there was still a part of her that held back, unwilling to believe entirely. For this to work, he would need to prove his commitment not just to her, but to Lucien as well. "We'll see," was all she could manage before standing. "Good night, Sebastian." He watched her leave the library, the weight of his promise pressing heavily on him. But it was a weight he was willing, determined to carry. Epilogue. A new beginning. 2 years had passed since the night Isabel and Sebastian confronted the past in the gardens of Ravenswood Castle. Now, the estate was more alive than ever, filled with Lucien's laughter echoing through the halls and the rhythmic clatter of hooves as he learned to ride under his father's watchful eye. That morning, sunlight streamed through the grand windows of the sitting room, illuminating the table where Lucien was bent over a map, sketching routes for his grand explorations. Isabel sat nearby, quietly sewing, a smile forming whenever Lucien called her over to check something. "Papa said that when I'm older, we can visit the lake where he grew up," Lucien said, his eyes never leaving the map. "He said I can swim there if I keep practicing." "That sounds wonderful," Isabel replied, pride evident in her voice. Outside, Sebastian watched the scene through the window, a sense of peace washing over him that felt almost unreal. He had worked tirelessly to earn Isabel and Lucien's trust, and now, every small moment shared with them was a reminder of how much his life had changed. "Are you going to stand there pretending to be mysterious, or will you come in?" Isabel asked, looking up from her sewing when she noticed his figure at the window. Sebastian opened the door and stepped inside, his smile a little sheepish. "Just enjoying the view," he said, moving to kiss the top of Lucien's head. "What's this, young explorer?" "A map of the world," Lucien exclaimed excitedly. "Mama said maybe one day we can travel for real, like in the stories we read." "And we will," Sebastian promised, sitting down beside his son. "But first, I want you to explore every corner of this castle. After all, it will be yours one day." Lucien beamed, his smile lighting up the room, and Isabel chuckled softly. "I hope you're ready to field 1,000 questions about ancient armor and secret passages." "I'm honored to be his guide," Sebastian replied, looking at Isabel with a tenderness that spoke volumes. The rest of the day was filled with small joys, a walk through the gardens, an impromptu picnic under an ancient tree, and stories told by firelight in the library. Lucien, as always, was the center of it all, his energy and curiosity binding Sebastian and Isabel in ways they never could have imagined. Later, when Lucien finally fell asleep, exhausted from the day's adventures, Isabel and Sebastian stood on the terrace, gazing at the stars. "He's happy," Isabel said, her voice filled with emotion. "Because of you," Sebastian replied. "Because of us," she corrected, smiling at him. Sebastian took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Isabel, you know there's still one thing I wish for." She raised an eyebrow, already guessing where he was headed. "And what would that be?" "I want us to be more than just parents to Lucien," he said, his tone serious. "I want us to be a family, in every sense of the word." Isabel was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the sky. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "You've proven you deserve to be a part of our lives, Sebastian. If you want to take this next step, I'm ready." Sebastian smiled, pulling her gently closer. Under the starry sky, they shared a kiss filled with promises for the future. And so, at Ravenswood Castle, a new story began. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, built on love, redemption, and the certainty that together, they could face anything. If you love heartwarming stories filled with romance, drama, and twists, don't miss the video, Duke Invites Maid to the Ball and What Happens Leaves Society in Shock Mine Love Stories. It brings an intriguing new dilemma. What happens when a duke breaks all societal norms and invites a simple maid to the ball? The breathtaking consequences will leave you pondering courage, love, and the barriers we're willing to break to follow our hearts. In this video, you'll see how a duke's quest for redemption impacts not just his life, but the entire circle of aristocrats around him. Just as we learned in this tale, the importance of confronting the past and building a better future is a central theme. Today's lessons: the power of love as a tool for transformation, the importance of overcoming past mistakes to regain the trust of those we love, how genuine actions speak louder than empty words. Comment below. Every love deserves redemption if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if lighthearted love stories are your style. In the pinned comment, I've shared links to some amazing Regency-era books I've read and loved. Get ready to dive into another emotional story and perhaps find inspiration for your own journey of love.